Back to Newsy Live. Well, the Senate is set to vote on the Disclose Act this week. It would require greater transparency into who's behind much of the secretive, often negative campaign advertising, and would include disclosing any contribution of $10,000 or more. And foreign entities will be banned from making any contributions. Now, the president says the bill is important in preserving our democracy. He's pushed Congress to pass this legislation.
There's much too much money that flows in the shadows to influence our elections. It's called dark money. It's hidden. Right now, advocacy groups can run ads on issues, attacking or supporting a candidate right until Election Day without disclosing who's paying for that ad.
Daniel Weiner joins us now. He is the director of the nonpartisan Brennan Center at NYU, where he helps lead the center's work on money and politics, along with many other democracy and rule of law issues. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Daniel, on the surface, it seems that knowing where the largest political donations might come from and how much would be a no-brainer. But in reality, this has become a huge issue. So why has campaign finance reform become so difficult to achieve?
Well, it's a great question. You know, more than a decade ago, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision called Citizens United, VFEC, which some folks may be aware of. And what that decision did is it was part of a series of Supreme Court decisions that significantly constrained the government's ability to put reasonable limits on money in politics. Frankly, the one area where the court really did say the government has wide leeway is to impose transparency rules, to require political spenders and campaign spenders to disclose the sources of their funding. But Congress and the executive branch have not really taken any meaningful action in the years since Citizens United to actually update our rules so that they're effective. And that's where we are today with large amounts of dark money in our political system. So it's both a legal challenge, but it's also a political challenge.
Well, why don't you think that anything has been done? Because what is at stake at the end of the day for politicians? And it's not just politicians that have influence in the matter, because this also affects executive, legislative, and judicial elections. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, that's a good point. And in some of these elections, of course, varies by state because states make their own rules for their own offices. I think that, we have a system in which, frankly, both parties have come to depend on large campaign expenditures. And there is definitely some resistance to making the change, although there is momentum to do so now in Washington. I think we should be very clear. There are a lot of politicians that are pushing very hard for this, a lot of elected leaders. But I think the combination of the courts and where they are and gridlock in Washington and to some extent at the state level and the powerful interests that don't want to change our system has obviously made change difficult. We have achieved actually, significant reform at the state level in states of all different political hues. Some of the most effective campaign laws exist in Montana, in Wyoming, in some of these very conservative states. And so I do think at the state level we have seen progress, and hopefully there is momentum building to progress at the federal level too.
You've been talking about reforms happening at the state level, and you've been really touching on legislative elections. I wanted to talk about how dark money might also influence the judicial branch.
Sure. Well, obviously, dark money is an issue in state-level judicial elections. There is also undisclosed money that goes into advocacy for federal judicial nominations. Now, that is a little different than campaign money, than electoral spending, but certainly undisclosed funding that goes into advocacy campaigns, again, on both sides, frankly, has become a significant issue. And that is actually something this bill also deals with, in the sense that it requires disclosure for certain entities that run ads trying to influence judicial nominations as well as federal elections. And it's what many people view as an emerging problem.
And is this why we've seen the changes that we have seen on the Supreme Court bench? Could this have any impact on that specifically?
Well, I think that it is important to separate the issue of dark money from whether that is the one factor that got someone on the bench. That's not something that, I'm prepared to say. But what I will say is that it is one aspect of a judicial confirmation process that I think we can all agree on all sides is broken. I don't think there's anyone, a Republican, Democrat, Independent, who is happy with how we go about confirming federal judges right now. And certainly the amount of money, the amount of dark money that has gone into this process is one factor that has contributed to the kind of polarized, angry, and divisive way we go about, getting judges appointed to the federal bench.
So let's go ahead and circle back now to the Disclose Act and the biggest impact that we could see as a result should it pass, because I do understand that it most likely will fail. So if that is the point, then is this bill really just symbolic? Because I understand that this bill has been around now for more than a decade.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that, we can always have hope that this is an issue certainly that members of both parties should support. There's a long history in the Republican Party, for instance, of support for campaign transparency. So the late Senator John McCain championed it. But if this bill does not successfully overcome a filibuster, essentially, I think it's still far more than symbolic, because I think that, there's enormous support in the country for doing this. I think it's important for those who support greater campaign transparency to take a stand. And I think we need to keep the issue front and center on the national agenda. I think also, that there are things that the executive branch can do on this issue, that both the president and the Federal Election Commission, which is the agency that administers campaign finance, can do to promote campaign transparency on their own. And I think that this reinforces the need for them to take those actions. So I think it is important. I think it's an important step. And I think, things take time in Washington, but I think we need to keep the pressure up to have Congress take these sorts of steps. And this is certainly not the only one to guarantee a stronger, more secure democracy.
All right, Daniel Weiner, director for the Brennan Center there at NYU. Daniel, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.